Our last and final posting in Asia was in the best. It was Malaysia. Although we had had wonderful experiences in the Philippines and in Hong Kong, Malaysia was for many reasons very, very special. We were there a total of 5.5 years. And during that time, all of the children had schooling finally, even Alan, even though it was only sort of play school. And we lived in 2 different houses. The first one was in an area called Jalan Kenny Renda, and it was a big house on stilts. And there will be pictures at the end which you can see. And it was sort of overlooked a big
Canyon,
a big canyon, which swooped down to a middle and then rose up again on the other side, and then far away there were distant houses.
Why was it on stilts?
It was above ground level, a good part of it. Only the top level, the entrance level, was on ground level, and almost everything else was on stilts. The house itself was 3 floors. There was the entrance top level, there was the middle level, where there were bedrooms, and there was the lower level, where we had a very small family room, a very small bedroom, and the tiniest bath that Harry and I ever had to share. 2 people could not go in the bath at the same time and walk around. Bathroom, that is. The first order of business, of course, was getting the children established. And after, Don said it was 6 weeks that we stayed at the hotel in downtown Kuala Lumpur. And maybe he's right. He's got a pretty good memory for this part of his life. And it was where Gordon had the free reign of the hotel and was up and down the elevators all the time, and he and Don were. And at one point he ran out in front of he ran across the street in the face of traffic, made it all the way across to be hit by a bicycle. And he fell and cut his wrist on glass. Good old Gordy. But it's my fault. I wasn't a very good supervisor. So we moved into this house that I've just described, and we got servants right away. We had a cook, Ayen, and a housemaid called Mary. Her real name was Bajia. And Ayen and Mary had 2 children, and one of them was just a little older than Gordon. So Gordon almost immediately met those 2 children who lived in the servants' quarters, 2 floors down. Having no snobbishness at all, they became his best friends. And they were Jimmy and Small Girl. And sometimes we called them Big Girl and Small, well, she was Small Girl. And the house was wonderful for the children. Had this big spacious yard, and they could play and do all sorts of things and enjoy themselves very much. The schooling. Once again, we were faced with a British school system, so Edie was sent to the British Army School.
We all went there.
Yeah, you all did, yes. And she made a best friend, and they became very, very close buddies. And after the first year there was an incident, and she and her best buddy had been giggling and passing notes back and forth and scribbling things in their notebooks. What they were learning, the these 13-year-old girls. They were learning dirty words, and it was so thrilling, I guess, at that age, I guess. However, the principal didn't think it was thrilling, and he's the Army, whatever rank he had. He called the parents in, and I thought afterwards, well, how dare he get into their notebooks, and didn't they have any privacy? But this was the British system, and he was the principal, and so the upshot was that poor guy, the brother of Edie's close friend, he was the one that took the punishment because he had been telling them all these naughty things that little girls shouldn't learn.
So this is an older brother?
Probably a year older, so he
Okay.
got a caning.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah. And we decided at that point that Edie should go away to school. So we sent her to Chateaubriand in Lausanne. And we took her down to Singapore. Oh, before that, during this year that she had been with us in KL, she had piano lessons with Jovita Sen. And Jovita was a wonderful piano teacher who eventually taught Edie, Don, and Kathleen. Taught them all piano. And Edie progressed marvelously, and Don progressed marvelously, and Kathleen did very well.
I don't think I did very well.
You learned all the basics. You did. You learned noting. You learned notes.
Mm-hmm.
You got a basics in music education.
Which
Yeah.
serves her well as a cellist.
I never had the flair that Don and Edie did.
That's right. Not for piano.
No.
You did for cello.
Yes.
So we went down, Edie, Kathleen, and I, to Singapore, where we were going to send Edie off to Chateaubriand, and I have no idea why I didn't go with her. Stupid. Well, I think it was because Jovita Sen was going anyway, because her husband was Swiss, and she was going back to their home in Switzerland, and she volunteered to take Edie, and well, it seemed so easy. Why should I bother to go? It was so unfortunate. I didn't get to settle her in and tell her how much we were going to miss her and how I hope she'd do well and all those things that you hope will. And of course, poor Edie, her first 6 months at Chateaubriand, she was desperately homesick. And really it was hard for her. Another new school, another new language to learn. She learned British English, now she had to learn French. But before they set off for Switzerland, there was a split up that had been coming all this time. There was a great deal of unrest between Singapore and Malaya, north of Johor Bahru, which was sort of a dividing line in the country. Singapore being an island, and then north of that, all the rest of Malaya. It had been one unit under the British rule for hundreds of years. The Chinese were very dominant in Singapore, as were the Indians, and the Malays were dominant in the rest of the country, and more or less ran local government and had those skills and left all the business skills to the Chinese. But it wasn't working. So they were going to have this separation. And the separation was to occur at the exact date that Edie and Jovita were leaving for Switzerland. And the upshot was that when we got to Singapore, there was a curfew, and we couldn't leave the apartment, except on an emergency to catch an airplane. So we couldn't even go to the airport to see her off. and she left all by herself. And the first Christmas I should have brought her back home, but I didn't, and I'll never know why. I think it had something to do with money. And I didn't realize at that time that we had plenty of money. I didn't realize that for a long time. But that's sort of an aside. That's another story. Anyway, we left Edie there for a whole school year. And when she came back for the first summer of her return, her best friend had moved on. You know how best friends fall out? Well, the best friend no longer wanted to have anything to do with her. So once again, sort of, there she was. But it was a good summer. We called it, all of us, we called it the Sound of Music summer. That was when The Sound of Music was such a famous musical. And we all went down to the clubs. Once again, we had a membership to the Selangor Golf and Country Club, and I played golf at least 3 times a week, and to the Lake Club, which had the beautiful swimming pool. And we would all go down to the Lake Club, and children would swim and order lunch and have a great time. And if I couldn't go, well, Edie would pick up the phone and call for a taxi, and they'd be taken down on their own, and she would sign chits, and Harry would pay them. It was very independent. We had one home leave when we were living in KL, and we spent that home leave, well, I don't remember, so it doesn't really matter. I'd have to go back and think about where we went. But we did have one home leave, and when we came back, we went to a different house, and the different house was a really lovely house. Oh, the rooms were enormous. Had a beautiful big living room, a beautiful big porch, and all our furniture was sort of, looked small in it. We didn't really have enough furniture to fill it. When I first got back to the States and we bought our first house in Westport, Connecticut, and I saw the living room, I thought, oh, it's so tiny. And it was, by my standards. While we were on that first tour, first 2 years in KL, television became available. It was done by the BBC, so we were able to rent a television set, and we would have it down in our little family room, and we'd turn on the television. I think it came on from 4 to 6 or 4 to 7, something like that. And one of our favorite programs was the Flintstones. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So we would sit there and ooh and ah over television. It was fun for all of us, and the servants came down too and watched.
How long did you stay in Malaysia?
5.5 years. We were in Malaysia 5.5 years. And during that time, the second time after home leave, living in a new house, Edie was away at school, and it was decided that the American community would get together and found an American school, which they did. Harry was very instrumental in helping to set it up. He even contacted Adrian Sibilich, who was his brother-in-law, to see if he would like to come and be the first principal. But Sib was much too homebound and had much too much interest in what his children were doing in the States and was not interested. I don't know what Jackie felt about it, but I never heard. But they found a very good principal, and they found very good school teachers. Most of them were American women living in KL who had been school teachers back in the States, and they were all very good and competent. It's children had really wonderful schooling, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And you wore uniforms.
Yeah.
And you looked so attractive and well-bred, and there was none of this hippie stuff. That hadn't started yet. And it was a very nice period. I played badminton with the Queen.
How did you get to do that?
Well, Harry was the president of the American Club. And because we were on that list, we got invited to all the embassy parties, the national days. And because Malaya became Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur became its capital, it became the capital of a nation state. And so they were embassies, not consulates. And so we got invited to all of the consulate parties. It was great fun. I was known by all the servers, all the journalists who served, all the waiters who served at every party. They would see me coming and automatically present me with my gin and tonic. I was drinking gin then when we got to the party. And the school had prospered, and our social life had prospered. And Hovita and Sammy Sen became very important in our lives. We traveled to Cameron Highlands with them one time, and we stayed in a wonderful little cottage there. It was lovely and cool in the Highlands. There are 2 books written about the Highlands. Have you read either of them?
Novels?
Novels.
I think I have, and I'm trying to remember what the name of the books written about Malaysia.
Well,
Malaya.
I will get the titles for you
Okay.
and see if you've read them, because I wrote them down, of course. And I had to give a book report. One of them was a story about the Highlands, and of course it was very interesting to me because we had been there. And all the tea plantations in
Right.
that area. And another thing that happened when we were on our trip to the Highlands was that, what was his name? Thompson. Jim Thompson disappeared. When we were there, and Jim Thompson was the founder of the Thai Silk Company in Thailand.
Oh, right. We heard about that when we were in Thailand. Okay.
And we had gone, Harry and I had made a trip to Thailand, but we made a trip after he disappeared. But in other words, he was visiting the Cameron Highlands when we were there. He went out walking one day and never returned. And search party after search party went for him. They thought that he had been kidnapped, or that they thought a lion had gotten him. They came up with theories, but nothing was ever proved.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
So it's still a mystery as to
It's
what
still a
happened.
mystery. And later, when Harry and I made a business trip to Thailand, which included a side trip to Angkor Wat and Laos and Cambodia, we went up the river. They still have the collies or the rivers in no time. And they've been all paved over, I understand. There are no more river traffic in Thailand. So we went up the river, and then we stopped right outside his house, and we went and toured, and we bought Thai silk, and we heard about his disappearance again. And so, what else happened in Kuala Lumpur when we were there?
So Kathleen used to go riding.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen went riding, and Don went riding,
Mm-hmm.
and you had some pretty good lessons, I think.
Oh, yes. It was lots of fun.
Mm-hmm. We had one Christmas when we all went away someplace. A very selective group of expatriates went away one Christmas.
So what were each of the kids most involved with when they were in Kuala Lumpur?
Well, Kathleen, I think you had school, and did you have playmates? I can't remember. Yes.
Fenella Clegg and Linda Brown.
Okay,
Those were my two friends that I remember.
all right. And what
Both
did,
British.
both British, and what did, Edie was away at school. Don, sort of a tag-along as I recall. He went right in too. He was always a very dutiful sort of, not too assertive. He's not very assertive now. Don, Gordon was always getting into trouble of one sort or another.
Mm-hmm.
And Alan was the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Alan was the baby just growing up.
So how old was Alan when you all left Malaysia?
Alan was just 5.
Okay.
He had just turned 5.
All
And
right.
Gordon and Alan were both in a wedding. And they had those cute little costumes on. It looks very cute. And Don, as Don's real interest was music, he really worked hard on his piano. I never had to tell him to practice, ever. So that was his basic accomplishment.
And so what happened professionally then that ended the stay in Kuala Lumpur?
What happened was that at that period of time, there were a lot of movement in the company, and overseas employees were not as necessary. The bigwigs were beginning to realize that their Chinese and native employees were just as competent to do the work of the highly paid executives. The other thing that happened was that Castro happened, and he, what's the word for it? He commandeered, he took over all the...
Nationalized.
What?
He nationalized.
He nationalized all the oil companies in Cuba, and all those executives were sent home, and they had been highly paid executives, and some of them were senior to Harry, and they had to find places for them. So that's what happened.
And so Harry was then called back to the United States?
Harry was going to come back to the United States and work in the New York office.
Which he did for a few years. Which he did for a few years.
Which he did for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so how was it moving to Connecticut?
Gordon was the one that seemed to feel it the most. We traveled home by way of Alaska, Vancouver, Seattle, and then finally California. And we stayed at home with the families one more time. Harry and I and Gordon and Don drove across the country in our 2-year-old Cadillac. Eldorado, no, it was a Cadillac. It was a great big Cadillac. It's the biggest you could have. And Fran Marshall, who is now Jean's husband, of course, had been the original owner, so he sold the Cadillac to Harry at a very good price, and we drove across country in this gorgeous big car. Reached the East Coast and started looking for a house. And we house hunted for about 3 days. We knew where we didn't want to live. We didn't want to live in Long Island. We didn't, because of the taxes in New York State. We didn't want to live in New Jersey. We wanted to live in Connecticut, which at that time had no state income tax. So we looked exclusively in Connecticut, starting with Greenwich, Darien, where the by that time the Dudleys were living in Darien. We were determined we were to live in Darien, but we couldn't find a house there. Housing was pretty short. And finally, on the fourth day, we had a very knowledgeable real estate lady in Westport who said, to get what you really want, you're going to have to raise your price. You're
Okay.
going to have to go up higher. And Harry said, all right. So we got a house for $73,000.
Wow.
That nice house on,
On Bittersweet
on
Lane?
3 Bittersweet Lane.
Yeah, that was a great house.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
So I think that's just a fabulous, if albeit brief, tour of your 21 years overseas. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And we'll at some point go through the photo albums and get some more photos on here.
yeah, maybe I can look through them. Maybe tomorrow morning quickly you could
Yeah.
photograph some.
Sure.
Let's go for now.
Yes.
Let's go for now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That
Yeah.
was very, very interesting.
Oh,
Yeah, that was a project. I appreciate you doing it again.
Yeah,